Here's also some depressing theory. So you might think that instead of building a search engine which is trying to have the same scope as Google, that instead I could be one of the 100 companies which are trying to build a vertical search engine. And for some verticals like travel, it works out pretty well to have a vertical search engine. But let's take, for example, a medical search engine as an example vertical. So people will come, they'll try out your medical search engine. It probably can be better than Google for medical queries because it's very difficult to write an algorithm that can decide whether or not a page of medical advice is good or bad. So you can certainly build a vertical search engine for medical queries that does very well compared to Google. But the challenge is that people don't actually make that many medical queries. Even though it's 10% of all queries, many people make one medical query a week, one medical query a month. And they simply don't remember, even if they enjoyed using your medical search engine the last time, they probably will have forgotten the next time they want to make a medical query to come by to your search engine. So they will go back to Google. And so there are 100 examples of dead vertical search engines that cost much less than $30 million to build, but it turns out it's really not a very viable strategy. Another example of a different approach you might take to this problem is to attempt to build a search engine for which a subset of users enjoy your search engine, and you will use it every day. Most of you probably use a search engine every single day. So if I built a search engine that appealed to some of the people in this room, that they went to every day, at least they'd remember to come back. And this startup SearchMe that you probably have never heard of or don't remember tried to do this. They built a very visual search engine that showed the results in a different fashion, and that actually didn't work very well. So there's no good approach to it that no one's thought of yet. People have tried a variety of different approaches already, and they haven't worked. So all of this are reasons that this is a big opportunity, but it's a very difficult one to attempt to attack. Even if you have to raise $30 million, which is a relatively large amount of money for a Silicon Valley startup, and even though the odds look bad, you can still actually raise money and do this. And so the way you do it is that you reduce as much risk as possible by writing as much software as possible with a small team early on. And we took this approach. The second way is that it's very difficult for a first-time founder to raise a large amount of money. That's okay. There's a lot of us old people in the Silicon Valley who've already done a startup or two, and if you have a track history of successfully making money for your investors, which I do, then you can successfully go out and raise money. My last startup actually went and built a networking chip, and so it cost us $20 million just to build that chip. We had to build it for several generations before we successfully sold the company, and now Intel owns that technology, and they're putting it onto their Intel Xeon CPU for supercomputing. So it can be done, and if you've done it once, it's pretty easy to talk those same investors into having you do it again. So one of our lead investors in this company, Blekko, was also a funder of my previous startup. While this is more difficult to have an experienced team, other people have tried this. So both Cool and SearchMe had very experienced teams. They were able to raise the right amount of money. But since we started in 2007, actually no one has raised money to build an English web-scale search engine. So it's very important when you're building a startup to do as many experiments as possible to discover what you're good at. We've been going through that process. As I mentioned, when we started, we had some ideas. None of these ideas actually worked out well, except for one. And that's sort of our fundamental thing. It's using human curation to supplement an algorithm for returning results. This idea is very different from what Google does. In fact, it's against Google's religion, which is a good thing. That way it's something that Google will not want to imitate. Instead, they will fight against it as much as they can or ignore it. And so we thought that this was a good way, especially for topics like medicine, that adding in the opinion of doctors as to which websites are good ones for medical advice is a very straightforward way